Nilou is finally out, and this is an honest look at how she works with different teams and weapons at Constellation Zero. So here's exactly what you need to know about her in this showcase video. I'm actually kind of surprised. I had really low expectations for Nilou, but after testing her out and building various teams, I have come to a very unique conclusion about her, which I will reveal later in the video. There are some obvious drawbacks I will talk about, but for now, I want to show you her personal damage potential, the teams and builds I tested, and which weapons I found to be great for her. First of all, let's take a look at her personal damage. I'll be using a fully refined Iron Sting, however, Sapwood Blade is also a strong alternative, but for the sake of keeping things simple, the Sting will be showcased. The artifacts are a mix of Tenacity and Wanderers. Honestly, Tenacity 2-set matters the most here, because all her talents and passives scale off HP, so the other set can be basically anything, and for this showcase, she is fully built with HP main stat artifacts. So, starting off with the most simple ability, her burst goes through a very long animation and then deals initial damage, which will tag the enemies, and then a few seconds later it will deal damage once more. Honestly, it has a pretty strong damage multiplier, so even without critical hits, it deals about 8 and 10,000 damage respectively. Now, her elemental skill has a ton of text, but it's really simple. Once you activate it, it will deal small initial damage, then your next 3 hits can be changed from the skill again or normal attack. You can see the counter above her head to keep track of it, because once it fully lights up, the third hit will determine the outcome. If the third hit is normal attack, she will gain 8-second duration of sort of like Hydro Infusion, except it still uses the same multipliers and attack animations from her skill talent. Now, if you do the final third hit by pushing the skill button, she will gain a big water ring around her, which will then apply wet status for a total of 5 times. It won't damage enemies, it will simply apply wet, which is kind of similar to Barbara's skill, except it's bigger. So if I for example use her burst, then skill, then do 3 normal attacks, I can continue dealing hydro damage on field with her, and it will be around 83,000 once the skill ends. I mean, that's not a lot, especially considering how much time she had to spend achieving this number. However, Hoyoverse specifically designed her to work with Bloom, because both her passive talents completely transform this reaction. As long as the party is made up of Hydro and Dendro characters, the Dendro cores now become Bountiful cores. These new and improved cores almost instantly explode and deal increased damage. So now, if I use on-field Nilou to create Bloom reactions, you can see the Bountiful cores explode for around 23,000 damage. And if I do the whole combo I did previously, the total damage goes up to about 280,000. That's more than triple the amount of her raw Hydro damage. And keep in mind, this is only single target numbers. It can easily be doubled with 2 or more enemies. And because I started off the combo with her creating a couple of Dendro cores, the second rotation would be even more powerful. Because here's the thing, in order to create the Bountiful cores, she needs to activate the final third step of her skill. It doesn't matter if the finisher is a normal attack or skill, it just needs to happen. Because then, for 30 seconds, which is basically enough for any team comp rotation in the game, anyone in the party who causes Bloom reactions, they will now produce Bountiful cores. And the reason why I built Nilou with full health artifacts is because for every 1,000 health points she has after 30,000, everyone who produces Bountiful cores, it will deal 9% more damage. So in this case, she has 59,000 health, or in other words, these powerful cores now deal 261% more damage, and the cap is 400%. So imagine if she had better substats or her signature weapon. Also, since I mentioned her water ring can apply wet, this also means she can be used off-field to trigger Bloom reactions, which will be around 9 times if considering her ICD with Hydro application. And after testing out her full combo rotation, I was able to get around 207,000 damage. Again, keep in mind the damage becomes better on second rotation because 4 of these cores were not bountiful before she activated the team buff. But anyway, you might be wondering, what if she's using regular artifact loadout like HP Sands, Damage Goblet, and Critical Rate Circlet? Well, that's an interesting thing to consider, especially if you have Festering Desire, since as I said before, even when she gains that pseudo Hydro Infusion for normal attacks, it's still considered skill damage, and this weapon boosts the damage. So by herself, she can output around 158,000 damage, or 227,000 damage if there's Kazuha and Hydro Resonance involved. I also tested her in a vaporized team. I could get critical hits from her burst like 55 and 68,000, and she was able to score 10 vapes for a total of 340,000 damage after adding in the raw hydro damage. I mean, with all things considered, that's pretty decent. But the problem is that I spent hours trying to figure it out, but I don't believe there's a good, realistic way to also gain VV Shred and hydro damage boost from Kazuha. Sure, you can do some nice screenshot damage with her, but later, as I will show you in the Abyss, vaping her attacks is pretty much the only achievable thing in the team comp I built around her. You won't really get to boost her damage in any other ways, unless I'm missing something. All in all, I'm pretty happy with her personal damage. I could have gone and shown you her bloom damage on multiple enemies, but you'll see the ridiculous power of it in the next segment. So instead, I wanted to show you her personal single target damage, because it is lacking with all things considered, since even if she scales with HP and can deal decent amount of hydro damage, building her as a traditional damage dealer in bloom teams means you're going to miss out on a huge chunk of damage her bountiful cores could deal otherwise. And that includes all of her teammates who can benefit from the boost. But let me just show you what I mean by that. So, just like with every other showcase, keep an eye on the bottom of the screen to see what loadout and stats Nilou has. Now, I first wanted to see just how good her bloom teams are, because if I'm going to go through all the trouble of building restrictive team comps, I better see some payoff. The first team was entirely free to play. Barbara, Kali, and Dendro Traveler, and believe it or not, but it was actually really good. Bountiful core damage ranged from 23,000 to almost 30,000. It depended on who triggered, but on multiple targets with so many of them going off, it was a pretty spectacular sight. Now, there is a caveat. The current Abyss cycle I'm showcasing essentially gives 200 elemental mastery to everyone from causing bloom reactions. But I do have a level 80 Barbara, and as you know it, transformative reactions scale better with level 90 units, so I think it was a nice way to counter the Abyss blessing. Now, the first big thing I've noticed is that these bountiful cores really hurt, but not just the enemy, my team as well. On average, each explosion deals about 1,300 damage, so if you stay long enough in these explosions, squishy characters can easily die, which is why in these bloom teams, you need to bring a healer. We don't have Dendro healers, so the only ones that can help the team survive is either Barbara or Kokomi. Sure, Xingqiu can also heal a little, but you'll want real healing to live through these explosions. Still, getting caught in the explosion is beneficial, because this is considered Dendro damage, and one additional thing Nilou's passive does is that for 10 seconds after taking Dendro damage, everyone's EM is increased by 100. Now, the other important aspect will be the lack of crowd control. Since the team has to be made up of Hydro and Dendro, you can say goodbye to Animo units like Sucrose. I'm not sure how I feel about this. On one hand, these bountiful cores go off almost immediately, so it's hard for enemies to evade them. But on the other hand, if they move a lot or cannot be staggered, they could run away from Dendro Traveler's burst area, and then, for example, if there is no Dendro application off-field, well, you can't create blooms anymore. Now, I also wanted to see how the premium version of this team comp would feel. Here, Nilou is using her 5-star signature weapon, and instead of Barbara, we have Kokomi. This weapon skyrockets Nilou's health, and I'm almost able to reach the 400% Bountiful Core damage cap from her passive. So damage from Bountiful Cores is especially strong. Like, I was able to maintain 28 to almost 35,000 damage per bloom. It was nuts, I tell ya. And using Kokomi instead of Barbara just felt so much better. First of all, her jellyfish has way better hydro application, and it covers much larger area compared to Barbara's pitiful hydro ring you need to hug enemies with just to score reactions. And on top of this, you can easily go into emergency mode with Kokomi's burst, heal the team, and cause even more bloom reactions. In fact, I will say this right now, Kokomi to Nilou is like Xingqiu to Hu Tao. Maybe I'm being too dramatic here, I don't know, but it just felt so much better using Kokomi instead of Barbara. Don't get me wrong, you can still get the job done with Barbara, but she's just less flexible, even if she has some fun perks like C6 Auto Revive. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly do you keep track of who's causing bloom reactions? Well, the answer is, you don't really keep track of it. My logic with this double Dendro Hydro team comp is that I want to make sure that Dendro gets applied faster than Hydro. So I deploy both the Traveler's and Kali's skill in bursts, but before doing so, I make sure to first quickly use Nilou's skill with the skill as the third step, so she can gain the water ring that pulses slowly every 2 seconds, almost giving you a guarantee she will trigger blooms. But at the same time, she also activates or refreshes the buff, which transforms regular Dendro cores to Bountiful cores. And usually, the last character in the rotation is Hydro, like Barbara or Kokomi, so their Hydro application can also trigger reactions. But honestly, it's a bit chaotic most of the time, so there will be occasional reaction triggers coming from Traveler or Kale, which is why I also made sure to build at least 200 to 300 EM on them. And most importantly, this is why Nilou's HP build matters a lot, because she allows them to cause much better damage, since she also boosts Bountiful cores for them as well. Also, keep in mind that it's more efficient if Hydro triggers blooms, as I've shown in the past, and you also need to remember that enemies can take at most 2 bloom explosions every half a second, so keep in mind when building teams with her. Finally, I went ahead and tested few more variations of bloom teams. First was Triple Hydro with Traveler, utilizing Xingqiu and Yelan. I mean, those two are busted, and I wanted to see if they can effectively work against single targets, like some of the bosses, because even with the premium version of Nilou's Double Hydro Dendro, it would struggle a lot in the single target department. Here, with this team, it worked fine, but there weren't that many blooms, and they were only caused by Dendro Traveler, so all in all, it's a pretty goofy team. And speaking of which, I did not find any good team with Candice and Nilou. You desperately need healing with blooms, and outside of it, Candice basically offers little to nothing for Nilou. However, I did discover a really interesting team, Sacrificial Bloom Kale with Triple Hydro. So how it works is that Kale can cause decent amount of reactions with her skill, and with the Sacrificial Bow, she can spread out her Dendro application, and in result, the team actually works really well. I'm not sure entirely how viable it will be in future Abyss cycles, but I believe Kale is the blueprint for next upcoming Dendro characters to look out for, who have good on-field Dendro application, so that they can be the ones causing powerful bloom reactions. Now, outside of bloom teams, I tried out Nilou as a driver in Taser comp. Just like Raiden, she cannot trigger Beto's burst with her infused Hydro attacks, so we can forget all about the pirate. But going with Xingqiu, Fischl, and Kazuha, yeah, it works well. But I mean, these 3 characters alone are busted enough to clear the Abyss with no problems. And as for Vape Nilou, again, she works with the extremely powerful core of Benny, Xiangling, and Kazuha or Sucrose. But again, I wasn't really able to figure out how I can also apply VV Shred on enemies with Hydro, unless you do something funky like using her burst first, then drop Benny's circle nearby, and cause double swirl with Kazuha. I mean, that's fine, but I found it to be more simple to just do Pyro and Anemo attacks first, and then switch to Nilou and unleash her whole Vape combo. All in all, there's definitely some unique bloom teams you can build right now, or you can also use her in comps like Taser or Forward Vape Nilou. But remember, if it's not a bloom team, you can basically just erase Nilou's passive abilities, and then she basically becomes a wannabe child or Ayato for the traditional team comps like Freeze. So what do I think about this dancer's performance? I honestly didn't expect her to be this reasonably good with all things considered. I say the word reasonable because I do see quite a few flaws with her, but starting with the good things first. If you do use her in a bloom team with full health artifact set and equip her with Iron Sting or Sapwood, everyone in the team including herself will deal considerable amount of bloom damage thanks to her unique Bountiful Core's passive. Now, I didn't really talk too much about her burst, but mainly because it's not that super relevant, in a good way. You don't have to use it every rotation, and in fact, because of its long animation, I would actually use it to avoid big enemy attacks or lots of bloom explosions. Oh, and because her skill takes a while to fire off with multiple hits, giving her Favonius Sword can be great if other teammates need that extra energy. Or you can even use a Sack Sword for some on-field shenanigans. So basically, she's easy to build, has great free-to-play weapon options, and her bloom teams work as intended by the devs. Now, when it comes to her drawbacks, the biggest one has to be her restrictive team comps. Right now, even if Kale, Barbara, and Traveler are great free-to-play options for her, you still need to build them. And aside from Traveler, I'm not sure how many people have their Kale and Barbara ready to go. I also find it funny that her best teammate is Kokomi. Don't get me wrong, I love the fact that the fish lady is getting so much love, but at the same time, she's a limited unit and there's barely anyone who can heal in bloom teams. I also think we haven't seen the true power of Dendro units yet, at least in bloom teams. So if someone like Dendro Archon or Alhaitham turns out to be busted, they might become essential for Nilou if you want to see better performance. Finally, for someone who scales off health entirely, her personal damage performance, no matter how you build it, is still kind of average. This especially becomes clear when you use her off-field. Her Water Ring only applies wet, so like 90% of her damage will be just blooms anyway. And of course, if I hadn't made it clear by now, using her in bloom teams against single targets is pretty lackluster. But on the flip side, it performs extremely well with 2 or more enemies. But all in all, I would say Nilou right now feels great. However, I imagine she will become far more better when more Dendro and Hydro units get added into the game. Right now, I would say if you care about your Primo gems, just skip her banner and wait for a rerun, especially if you're thinking of pulling for Dendro Archon, who is coming very soon. Otherwise, go crazy with some Bloom teams, and if you're one of those people who are bent on making Vape Nilou work, well, more power to you. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I put a lot of work into it, so I'd appreciate if you could press the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.